Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I am Parikshit Luthra. The top story on this week's edition: global technology giant Microsoft has warned the Chinese state-sponsored hackers have compromised critical US cyber infrastructure across multiple sectors. In an advisory, Microsoft said a hacking group codenamed Volt Typhoon has been allegedly working towards disrupting communications infrastructure between the United States and Asia. The US government has warned that China is capable of launching this attack on key sectors, including oil and gas pipelines and railway systems. Officials have said that they are working towards understanding the breadth of potential intrusions and associated impact. Meanwhile, the Chinese government has rejected the claims made by US, citing that the United Nations and its allies are spreading disinformation. So what is the potential impact of this alleged hack attack? To discuss this and more, we are now joined by John Hultquist, Chief Analyst at Mandiant Intelligence. Mr. Hultquist, thank you for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. How serious was this attack on US critical infrastructure?
Well, it wasn't serious yet. I think that's the important thing to remember. This appears to be essentially an actor that is conducting reconnaissance and probing critical infrastructure for potential incidents down the road. So they are essentially preparing for, say, a conflict when they may decide it's time to carry out disruptive or destructive attack.
Right. And what do you think was the real motivation for a hack of this kind? According to some reports, many say that the real target was Taiwan.
Well, you know, we've seen Chinese activity in the United States in the past in critical infrastructure. We've seen it even in India in the past in critical infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily have to be related to any single point of conflict. This is actually something that states do fairly normally. They dig into critical infrastructure so that they are there when conflict comes. And that could be, of course, that could be a conflict over Taiwan, but it could be any kind of conflict or even a situation that's not necessarily a war, a full-blown armed conflict. The thing about this capability is if you wait to dig in till conflict comes, it'll be too late. You have to spend time and get in early. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that something is impending.
Right. This assessment that has been made by Microsoft, how different or how serious would it be when you compare it to previous cyber attacks carried out by Chinese entities?
Well, that's one of the interesting things about Chinese actors is they haven't carried out a lot of disruptive and destructive cyber attacks. Russia, for example, has carried out a tremendous amount, right? They've turned out the lights in Ukraine. They've attacked the Olympics. They have dug into election systems in the United States. They've got a long history of doing that sort of activity. We haven't seen that from China. So, you know, one of the problems with sort of understanding their capability is they haven't shown it to us. So this is actually a glimpse into a problem that we were, you know, trying to understand better, and it's actually a step forward for us as far as building better security for our critical infrastructure.
Just to give our viewers a sense, Volt Typhoon in this case was able to infiltrate organizations using an unnamed vulnerability in a popular cybersecurity suite called FortiGuard. What impact could this have had on US telecommunications infrastructure in Guam?
Well, I think the concern here is that there could be a disruption of telecommunications infrastructure, potentially at a time when it's crucial. This would be the first time we've seen something like that. We've actually saw something very similar in the Ukraine's invasion. You know, right at the outset of the invasion, literally the night before, satellite telecommunications were attacked, and this essentially allowed Russia to reduce some of the ability of Ukrainian government and military to organize themselves. And that's sort of a classic pre-invasion or pre-armed conflict scenario, right? Before tanks roll, it's not, or ships move, it's not uncommon for telecommunications to be targeted.
Right. Looking at what has happened in Guam, what are the kind of threats that U.S. allies need to be prepared for?
Well, India has definitely seen some probing of their critical infrastructure as well. I think we suspect that it's going on elsewhere in Asia. I think that the really important thing here is that we are enabling the organizations. A lot of them aren't actually government agencies or government organizations. So some of these are private companies that run our critical infrastructure, right? Because they don't necessarily have access to the same intelligence that government organizations have, but they will be the ones who will be responsible for defending against these threats.
Right. I would also like to ask you how the U.S. government will respond and what exactly was the vulnerability in the system that the Chinese entity could actually exploit.
So I think this is the U.S. government's response right now. The best thing for the U.S. government to do is to essentially empower the private sector to prepare for this type of threat. And the way you do that is essentially sharing information. There was a time when a lot of this information was sort of hidden behind closed doors in the government, and that does nobody any good. So it's really great to see this stuff being shared out. As far as how they got in or how they're getting into some of these places, Chinese actors have recognized that there are certain systems on networks that are that have poor detection capabilities on them. Ironically, some of them are actually cybersecurity tools, and we've seen a concerted effort for them to essentially abuse those tools for access into networks. So ironically, some cybersecurity vendors need to up their game as far as allowing detection of threats on their own tools.
In the backdrop of what has happened and the kind of intelligence that Microsoft has put out in public domain, what is the kind of advice that you're giving, that Mandiant Intelligence is giving to its clients who may be in the financial sector, in the energy business, or even in cloud services?
I think sorry, I missed that last part. I think the most important thing that we can do here is
sure.
Is prepare the critical infrastructure sectors who control all these resources, right? They are absolutely responsible for a tremendous amount of defense, the defense burden here. And what we really want to do is pass on the intelligence that we gather so that they can build better security. If you're building security without intelligence, you're essentially trying to building walls against an adversary that may have planes. You just don't know what you're going to be facing. And so it's a far better plan, or far better way of going about things, is to have that information about the adversary, how they operate, how you can detect them, and potentially and how you can prepare. And that's what we're doing now.
Right. Have you seen the frequency of such attacks increasing over the last few years? Next year, the United States goes into elections. Do you think it is possible that during election time, these hacks, these attempts to attack critical infrastructure may increase in frequency?
We have seen some interesting incidents during election periods in the past. During the last presidential election, there was actually a series of Russian incidents that appeared to be that were going against or targeting U.S. critical infrastructure. And we had to ask ourselves at the time, were they doing this to sort of draw our attention away from the election problem? Were they sort of exhausting our resources? And so we are very concerned as elections come around, what kind of attacks that we might be facing. We anticipate them now. I believe that we'll not just see one actor targeting U.S. elections, but many. and that's going to create quite a challenge.
Right. Thanks so much, John, for joining us, giving us your sense of the cyber attack that has taken place, the threat assessment made by Microsoft, its ramifications for US and allies, and what are some of the steps that we all need to take. Thanks once again for being with us here on CNBC TV18. On that note, we take a short break, but don't go anywhere. A discussion with the EU's climate policy chief, Frans Timmermans, on clean energy transition and the dire need to reduce global carbon emissions. Stay tuned.